All right. How are you all? Sorry for getting this posted a little later in the week, but we'll cover ethics and the reason for kind of the assignment that's due next week. And feel free if there's issues with submitting things or accessing the CITI training, let me know. But so ethics is a big deal it's a big deal in science. And so here are just some basic questions for kind of what to ask. I think the one that tends to play a bigger role is conflicts of interest, the issue of approved by an IRB. If it's in a reputable journal, they require it. I guess you will. So if it's an animal study, though, the equivalent is IACUC. And if you've worked on an animal study, at least that's what we call it at K-State, it's basically an animal care equivalent of the IRB. They have similar concerns, but different types of questions and different types of requirements that they ask for. So, and we will get to some of the differences when we talk about the animal studies. So for the financial relationships, this is an interesting issue, especially in the health sciences. So in food science, maybe engineering, other physics, there may be less concern. I don't know. I do know about food science. I don't know about engineering and physics and some of these other sciences, biological sciences, etc. However, in health sciences, this is really important. It's the issue with the dietitians and aspartame, and the Washington Post article demonizing what the dietitians were doing is an example of why, in my professional opinion, I think health scientists, health researchers, clinicians may get under the scrutiny a little bit more, just because this is my professional opinion. I don't know specifically, but I think a reason for it is consumers kind of understand health a little bit better than engineering, physics, computer science. So, because it happens to them, and especially nutrition, there's a notion that because people eat, they understand nutrition, and to some extent, there is some truth to that. But when it comes to nutrition science and those types of things, the science of it, it's not that simple. Obviously, people have their experiences with different things, allergic reactions, food safety, blood glucose issues, those types of things. And so everybody has their experience with it. But when it comes to the science part, those anecdotal experiences and personal experiences aren't the same as understanding the science of nutrition. So anyway, there's significant issues with financial relationships with food industry, with big pharma, big food, etc. when it comes to health research. And so authors should report financial relationships, and they're required to if they have any. It's a potential source of bias. Reporting those relationships in industry-sponsored research is important because there's a 3 to 4 fold increase in research that's funded by industry showing results that support that industry, that company. Here's the caveat to that. Sometimes the industry will not publish non-significant work for their industry. And so, for example, if a lab has a quote-unquote self-funded study and they're testing a new athletic tape, and it doesn't show any benefits to the other the typical leading brand of athletic tape. Uh, they'll still publish it. However, if it's an athletic tape company and they're not the leading brand and they're trying to show that their product is better than the leading brand, and it's not, they may not publish it, because if their product is less than the leading brand, they may publish it and say, well, it's the same, so you can get the same product for 20% lower price. And it's kind of like generic drugs and pharmaceuticals. But if somebody's trying to demonstrate kind of superiority, to make a claim on their product, if there's no difference, sometimes the company may not publish it. Now, the universities tend to say there has to be an agreement with the university, and when a university agrees to these contracts for companies to fund research studies, there is typically a clause in that contract that says the university has the right to publish any data from this study. A reason is oftentimes there is student work tied to that research. So in essence, students tend to participate in the data collection process and or the writing process, especially graduate students and doctoral students. And so the university doesn't want a company to say, no, you can't publish that, you can't put that out in the public, because the university as a public institution is required to publish graduate student work, graduate student research. And so there was a conflict. And so now there could be an agreement that set aside that how that may work, and that's separate. But currently, companies can't really do that anymore unless there's a separate side project that's not part of the student's work. But anyway, and so some of that is that's a reason. Another reason is if a company's going to invest $200,000 in a project, they're going to be pretty certain that it's going to work. And so that's another reason for the different probability of finding differences, because they would have done some background work, maybe with animal studies, maybe with just pilot studies, or using other compounds or something else that's like, okay, this seemed to work, this seemed to work, this seemed to work. Okay, I think we're ready to go to a human trial. And so that's also a reason why industry-funded studies tend to come out favorable, is because they don't want to lose money on the project. It's a big investment for them. And so not that they will ensure that the protocol is right, because the scientist has to have, the independent scientist has to have jurisdiction over the protocol, but they will work with the scientist for methodology as far as what equipment to use, those types of things to complete the study. So anyway, so while it may look like there's bias, which sometimes there is, it's not that there's not, but that 3 to 4 times more likely is not necessarily because it was funded by industry. And so that's sometimes a big leap is, oh, well, then I shouldn't trust it. And it's like, well, there's a lot of work that went into that investment from the company that went into that. And so that's why they tend to be more likely to reach pro-industry conclusions. Editors, reviewers, and readers must determine if the competing interest is a source of bias. And so, if it's published, it's been peer-reviewed. If the editor and the reviewers find that it's, I don't see it's not visible by what was presented, that there's any reason why the company that funded the study influenced the outcome, then it will go through, and we will see later too that sometimes it's the scientists that are biased and are being unethical, and so that's the other thing to consider, and we'll go over Brian Wansing's case here shortly. So now they require financial disclosures. I think all journals require it. I don't know of a journal that doesn't now. And also medical disclosure, so financial or personal relationships that are inappropriately influence the actions of the author, editor, and reviewer. And so there may be an issue with, if it's a treatment, for example, there may be ties of the physician to the company, financial or not. So those are also of interest to disclose. So the health practitioner practices based on the evidence-based principles and current information, and interprets controversial information without personal bias. I mean, this is the one that's really hard, because sometimes it's, COVID is a great example. Some healthcare providers held professional stances that were counter to their personal stance or family stance, and so there were some, I think, probably hurt relationships because of how somebody stood and made decisions relative to COVID and what the science outcomes were versus what friends, family, the community, etc., kind of held. And so, because it ended up being political, and so if you were a Democrat in a Republican family, chastised. If you were a Republican in a Democrat family, chastised. Didn't matter which side. If you opposed one side or the other, it was a no-win situation. So it did not matter which side of the political aisle you were on, and it also depended upon what time of the pandemic these decisions were made, because at one point we had no information, so it didn't matter. But as things started to flesh out, there was more science, and the follow the science term was misused politically by both parties. Dang it, sorry. So the practitioner assumes lifelong responsibility, especially as long as they hold their license for personal competence and practice, consistent with accepted professional standards, and continually striving to increase professional knowledge and skills and apply them in practice. So how do they do that? Well, continuing education, and so that's part of attending conferences, attending workshops, and to get a license, practitioners have to show being up to date with current trends in evidence-based practice. And then the practitioner is alert to the occurrence of real or potential conflict of interest and takes appropriate action whenever conflicts arise. And so, but it's trusted. This is something where you have to use the honor system, and that's why things tend to be pretty harsh when a practitioner jeopardizes the honor system and does not live up to this responsibility. And so that's why the profession tends to come down hard, because that one bad apple then spoils the bunch. And so that's why you gotta mind your P's and Q's. It's stay in your scope of practice, do the best you can with the information you have, and getting greedy with money, popularity, whatever, social influence, can create some professional heartaches, and we'll cover a case in which that happened here shortly. The codes and policies for research ethics. So one is honesty. Be honest, honestly report data, do not falsify. So the one of the key things I learned in graduate school was whatever data you get, or the data you get, if it doesn't make sense, look at it, run through what you did, the methods that you did, the equipment that you use. Is the equipment calibrated? Because if you start saying, well, that's not quite right, it's about the decimal point seems off. Don't just move the decimal point. There may be something in the calibration that happened, but shifting things without, it'll come up in the video, the Brian Wansink video, but tweaking things, that's falsifying, fabricating, misrepresenting data. So that's where things can get complicated. And then do not deceive colleagues, granting agencies of the public. And so that goes back to the, do not deceive colleagues or the public. It goes back to the what the health issues with the paper on fructose and isocaloric intake in the kids. So there was some deception of colleagues, those in What the Health, those on the doctor's show, in the public, because there was some conflation of information that Dr. Lustig was doing. And so, was it intentional? I don't know. But what he said in that video versus what the study indicated was not true. There were some half-truths, and he didn't discuss the context behind those. At least I didn't see it discussed. What's presented in the debate was not discussed, and then he doesn't talk about it in the paper and his books that I'm aware of. Sorry. So honesty, objectivity is the other one. Minimize bias or self-deception. So avoid bias in the experimental design, data analysis, interpretation. Basically, be as objective as possible at all times. Disclose personal or financial interests that may affect the research. So the personal one. So that's one of the things where scientists get in a line of research, and all of a sudden something doesn't go quite what they expected. And so all of a sudden, well, there's a lot riding on this. If we don't find something, that's going to be a problem. And so there may be some personal bias to find we have to prove something here because I was given a lot of money, and it would be a failed study, and I wouldn't get any money anymore if we didn't find anything. And so that's kind of the problem with some of these personal interests and personal biases. The other aspect is, well, it's a ketogenic diet, it's supposed to work, why didn't it work? Well, I have money, so again, it's financial, or it could be, there's a lot of research that shows this works. If I don't show it works, that could be a problem. So anyway, those are examples. So honesty, objectivity, integrity, keep your promises in agreement, act with sincerity, just be honest, be truthful. It goes back to the issue of, it's better to tell the truth all the time than you never have to lie. And so if you're always honest and you follow these rules, you don't have to worry about anything. You make a mistake, own up to it. Strive for consistency of thought and action. Carefulness this is the measure twice, cut once kind of analogy in science. Avoid careless errors and negligence. So typically what will happen is there'll be two people that work with data entry to make sure numbers get entered correctly. There may be somebody who will read the data, somebody who enters the data, and there'll be cross-checking all the time. So usually there's not just one person entering data for the whole study. There may be some that will check, but then somebody else needs to double check relative to what was put in the statistical software or spreadsheet as the true value versus and then what was the printout. So and sometimes there's some manipulation of things. You're trying to find an average, and so there are a lot of errors that can pop up in getting to a data point let alone the statistics and collecting the data. Carefully and critically examine your own work, and the work of peers. Keep good records. So there's typically a lab book or something where when somebody does anything, there'll be a, hey, this is what I did today, and I entered these data. I had to go back and correct X, Y, or Z, or subject Y canceled today, so therefore they're dropping out of the study because they weren't able to fulfill the data collection requirements, whatever. And so everything that pertains to the study, even if maybe nothing happened, and on that date, no data was collected, no work was done on the study, because usually it's good to have just a record for every day, just in case. What did we do on that Saturday? Oh, nothing. Instead of, well, it's blank. So is anything done or not? Because here it's, because there may be a piece of equipment that says this was used on Saturday. We didn't have it recorded. What happened? And so it's just good to have notes for every day, just to make, and then whoever would use that, usually nowadays with software and stuff, it will log who logged in, so you can at least ask what happened. Openness, share data, results, ideas, tools, resources. So that pertains to, there was a study that was done, 2 studies that were done. One by Kevin Hall's group at the NIH, and then a reanalysis. Well, there's a group from Harvard that did a reanalysis of the reanalysis. So, which is one aspect of it, and and there was some conflict, but it was nice because now there's open data sets. So if like government money is used, like money from the NIH or USDA is used, there's typically a way that those data become available to the public. So any scientist can go into those data and look at it and see if there's another way to examine the data that were collected. And so that was kind of the discussion. And I'll go, it's the Ludwig and Hall files that are on Canvas in this section. And so that's what that's about. It's about openness, and then so one group was using the data from the other group, and there were some issues with that recently. Respect intellectual property. So this goes back to just cite and the issue with plagiarism and giving credit where credit is due, even if you have an idea. So it's one of those things, it's good practice in science. So usually there's an initial brainstorming meeting. Hey, what are we going to do? What are we going to study? It's the paper, the written notes on a napkin kind of thing where things get started. If there was somebody involved in that initial work that gets carried on, it's respectful to include the people there, because those ideas are that group's intellectual property. So there may be somebody that was there that doesn't participate in the study, but that person that was there was part of getting the money, getting the funding, getting the study to where it is. And so it's just simply to give credit where credit is due. They may have contributed 5%, but they still can, without that 5%, you wouldn't have 100%. So that's kind of an issue. So there may be, that's where the order of the authors, things like that, become an issue. Confidentiality, so much like medical records, confidentiality of science is no different. And sometimes when it's using clinical records, HIPAA is still there, but there's also confidentiality on the research side. So for example, sometimes the clinician isn't to know. So there may be a patient that's in a study, but the clinician may not know their outcomes. There may be a part of the study may be to inform the clinician, but there also may be, if they're wanting to see how clinicians treat and they're comparing the treatments of a condition from two different clinicians, they may keep those things separate. So that at the end of the day, oh, using, and maybe it's, maybe you're just looking for environment. There's a clinic that has, soft music, colorful windows, or decorations, and then there's one that's just, beige and plain walls and those kinds of things, to see if the environment does it. And if somebody knows, if a clinician knows which treatment thing they're in, then that may jeopardize the study. So anyway, that's just kind of an example that might show up. Responsible publications. So the goal is to publish to advance research and scholarship, not career. However, faculty, if they don't publish, they won't advance their career. So that's kind of a catch-22. So that's a hard one to toe the line on. So what happens when this is not necessarily done is there'll be wasteful and duplicative publications, and so there may be spin-offs of studies, because shoot, I've got to get 3 more publications and I don't have time to start a whole new study. So let's just use these other data and just throw something together that doesn't really make sense, and maybe try to get it published in a low tier journal just to advance one's career, to get tenure or to stay at a university, whatever. So that's a tough thing, but because it does happen, and the duplicative publications and the wasteful publications. The wasteful ones are sometimes hard to find, hard to tease out, because there's some big studies that it's like, we've got to break this up into 3 parts, because one big paper, we're gonna lose some of the important outcomes if we just do one paper and throw it all out there, because it's kind of much like you don't like to, maybe, I shouldn't assume there, but a lot of even scientists don't like to read a 20-page research study, because they're looking for, maybe it's something where they did a study with diabetes, cancer, and heart disease, and they're just wanting the diabetes. I just want to know what the diabetes, and so they have to weed through the cancer and the heart disease stuff to get to what they're interested in. So it may be better to do cancer, diabetes, heart disease. The issue is there a reasonable, rational way to split up a study versus we're just going to do older adults, younger adults, have 2 studies, versus putting them together. So that's just one example. Responsible mentoring, help educate, advise students and others, and junior faculty, and promote their welfare and allow them to make their own decisions. So part of the growing process is being able to say, hey, you know what, here's some responsibility, learn how to do this, and then you can. So what will tend to happen in a lab is, this is where undergrads, it's one of those hard parts where sometimes they get boring jobs. The goal is, so if it's a wet lab, the goal is not to have the undergrads do all the cleaning, whatever it is, dishwashing, cages if it's an animal study, prep, setting everything up. Hopefully the goal is to give them some data collection experience, letting them work with the different aspects of the study, obviously typically with oversight, but not just give them the jobs nobody wants to do. They're important jobs, so it wouldn't get done without those jobs. But that was in the 80s and 90s, and maybe 2000s. Hopefully that's not happening anymore. Hopefully. Respect colleagues, treat them fairly, and expect the same in return. So that was one of the ethical issues that came up in the recent Ledwig Hall issue, which I'll go over separately. So try to promote social good and prevent or mitigate social harms through research, public education, and advocacy. So that should be while we should be trying to help health, there should also be a way to disseminate, help the public understand, and so not just keep it within science. So that's open source, open access journals. That's been a big breakthrough for the public education and advocacy aspects, so that the science gets to the patient, for the instances of health, gets to the patient faster, or gets to the physician faster, than having to get through a paywall to be able to see it. And then it's embargoed maybe for 6 months, and so it doesn't get to the public for a year, whatever. There used to be some just barriers to science that to one aspect was the journals have a cost to them, to print it, to ship it, for the editors, to organize it, to put it all together. There's a cost because there's people involved, and so there's salaries and those sorts of things, and so there were costs, and so there were subscriptions, and they were paid through the library. But when they went open source, and the libraries lost money, it all of a sudden went to the research team to pay for those costs, and so there's still some of that out there, but it is what it is, and so sometimes again, there's an incentive. Sometimes you have to pay to get published. There's some ethical issues there too. So non-discrimination, so just like in other aspects of life, same applies to research. Now there is some unique aspects in which if you're studying something that pertains strictly to one sex or one race, ethnicity, or one region, and you have rationale for that, then that's fine. You're not discriminating. And so the discrimination is if what you're looking at affects men and women need to be in the study. You need to have a reason to exclude one or the other. And so that will affect the outcome. So anyway, that's the goal there. Maintain and improve your own professional competence, expertise through lifelong education. So even with CEUs, being compassionate about what you do, I think is important, and then take steps to promote competence in science. Make yourself better, and so PowerPoint was just coming out when I was in grad school. There was no online. Well, there sort of was. There's distance education. There's no online learning, and so my recent goals have been to try to be able to do this to help provide educational opportunities so that people could be parents, work, and if they're basically bring the class to the student versus the student coming to class. Both of those options are great, but one of the benefits from COVID is increasing the opportunities for online education. So that's one example. Legalities, knowing the laws that pertain to your profession, your healthcare. You break the law, you do harm to somebody, even if it's unintentional. If there was some ethics that were involved in that harm, even if it wasn't intentional, that could be a problem. So one of the examples that I said in class today was if somebody does bad science, even if it's a mistake, clinician uses that science, bad science, and treats a patient based upon that patient, these are all extremes, that patient happens to be severely injured or dies, whose responsibility is it? Is it manslaughter or person slaughter because bad science, and is it the scientist's fault? And so it would go back to the science if it was a scientific mistake, the errors happen, that people are human, or was it intentional? If it's intentional, that scientist might be responsible, held accountable for that health outcome that they didn't do, because the physician based the assumption that this was good science because it passed the peer review test, it went through everything, and then administered it to the patient and then the report outcomes. So just an example, an extreme example, hypothetical example, but an example nonetheless of kind of a worst case scenario. So here's the animal care. They have to do similar things. It's called IACUC at K-State, Institution Advisory Council for the Ethical Use of, Animal Care and Use Committee. It changed its name recently, or not, well, recently to me. I don't do animal studies. But it's similar to IRB. And show proper respect and care for animals. Do not conduct unnecessary or poorly designed animal experiments. Don't waste the animal's life. It's valuable. And so so some things have changed because some people just treated the animals very poorly. We'll just get another animal. And say, well, don't waste that one. So it's one of those things where the other aspect is, I know there's some issues with, well, don't even use animals, but the use of animals without the animals that we've had, the animal studies, we'd be so far behind in the science that we have, especially in the health sciences. It's, for cosmetics, I don't know. I don't use many, obviously. So I don't know. I don't have really an issue. I'd say not use it, but I know that it's important to some industries and some people, and even if it's burn victims and things like that. So I get that, but man, it's an ethical issue. So I tend to take the side of, I support animal research because the outcomes greatly benefit humans. There's a great benefit to humans. The issue is we need to follow these steps and make sure we're valuing that contribution just like we would value a human's contribution to science. Oops. Sorry. Okay. So human subject protections, the flip side of animals. Show respect. Conduct only necessary experiments. And so the issue is, don't collect extra data. If you're just doing a body composition study, don't also measure vertical jump and VO2 max and other aspects of human performance. If you're just interested in body, if that's the research question, don't put them through unnecessary steps. If you don't need blood, don't collect blood. So that's one of the things that's really helped recently, because some people say, well, we've got you here, so let's just collect some more data. And then you have subject burden. And so which is something we'll talk about when we get to surveys. Maybe you've been a part of some where you say, wow, I've been here 2 hours and doing these surveys. Is that 2 hours really necessary? And we talked about confidentiality, but make sure you protect that. And there's IRB expects certain things on protecting the data so that people can't hack into it. Disclose all pertinent information, include risks, expectations, and so the participant is to get their data and get their outcomes, and then what does it mean and what happened and those kinds of things. And so that's the end of this slide presentation on ethics. I'll have a separate one talking about Dr. Wansink, and those are the videos that are in the Canvas section. And so if you had the IRB module, or the IRB training is the assignment that's due next week. On that note, for assignments, 3 assignments left. One is I'm out tomorrow for a health issue in the family, so I won't be able to get to things probably for a couple days. I will have access to my laptop, so I will get some grading done, but the PICO assignment, which I'll get posted this weekend, I'll upload it or get it ready to publish this weekend and make sure everything's current for your group. And So there's the PICO assignment, there's a quiz over research terminology, and then the final project, which we'll cover all those next week. So in Module 5, we'll cover them. They won't all be in Module 5, but we'll bring them up and go over them. Thank you, and until next time, have a great day.